This is episode 678 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Andrew Handel. He is Director, Education and Workforce Development in that task force at the American Legislative Exchange Council. And welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we last talked when you came out with your 2023 Index of State Economic Freedom for the American Legislative Exchange Council. And in that index, uh, you you rated New Mexico, let's see, 35th. Uh,
37th in the
oh,
2023.
okay, maybe I'm looking at the wrong specific number. But now you have a new index, and this is the 2025 edition. And New Mexico, unfortunately, has fallen a few places down to, I see, let's see, overall, we're talking 44th, right?
Yep, 44th.
All right. Well, why don't you introduce yourself, your organization, and talk about this index, and then we can talk about why New Mexico is struggling in the education freedom index. But what's
Yeah,
ALEC, and you talk about your role with them and what their kind of philosophy is on education first.
sure. Yeah, so ALEC stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. We're the nation's largest nonpartisan organization with the membership organization of state lawmakers as well as private sector partners. Our goal is to bring everybody to the table and identify what the best policies are in federalism, limited government, and free markets. So ALEC's been around for north of 50 years now, going back to the Reagan days. So I'm very proud to be a part of it. And as you mentioned earlier, I lead our Education and Workforce Development Task Force. So I work with state lawmakers and advocacy groups and teachers and parents and everybody in the space to advance the best education policies. And obviously, a big focus of that is education freedom and making sure that parents are empowered to pick the best learning environment for their kids. So, yeah, really excited to get this new report out and excited to talk with you about it.
Yeah, now education freedom is a multifaceted thing. Why don't you talk about the broad categories that you rate education freedom on? And it's pretty cut and dry. You either have these various programs in place or you don't, but there's obviously nuance within those. So why don't you just run through the major categories and describe any kind of maybe things that might be misunderstood about those categories.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, it's pretty cut and dry from the category standpoint. We look at five different categories that we think are representative of education freedom in a state. The first is any programs in place that let dollars follow students. The second is charter schools. Third is homeschools. Fourth is virtual schools. And the fifth is open enrollment, which is your public school choice for listeners who might not be familiar with that. So, in the previous edition of this publication, we weighted those equally across the board. This year, after talking with our stakeholders and also just kind of internally reflecting on the methodology, we decided to increase the weight on the funding programs to 40%. And I think that's pretty, self-explanatory. States that have ESAs or tax credit scholarships or vouchers, they tend to be the strongest in terms of education freedom. Making sure that those dollars follow students really is the first and most important thing. Not to downplay the importance of the other categories, but that's why we decided to increase the weight there. And of course, New Mexico doesn't have any funding programs, so that had an effect and dragged them down a little bit.
Yeah, let's kind of pull that apart a little bit because you're really focused on what you'd call, I think, private school choice, programs that allow a different education entity to step in, with a lot less government control. Public school choice, allowing kids in one city or one school district to go to a neighboring school district. I mean, you're still getting the same general educational approach, especially here in New Mexico, where so much of the funding flows through the state, and school boards have limited ability to kind of be captains of their own ship. Charter schools a little more choice oriented, but also definitely a lot of government. They're government funded. There's still a fair amount of government control depending on the state. Now, homeschooling is one, and I'm interested in your thoughts. I mean, obviously, even to a greater extent than private school choice, homeschooling represents a fundamental break with with the traditional orthodoxy of education. Uh, any particular reason why homeschooling is maybe not double weighted or not as weighted as the private school choice?
Sure. Yeah. Homeschooling is an interesting one. I think when it comes to these funding programs like a tax credit, for example, that's something that homeschool families can still access. They can still use a tax credit to help pay for instructional materials at home, or depending on how you're going about it, could be a tuition payment somewhere. I don't want to say that the two things are completely separate. Certainly, there's still some cases where homeschool families can access those. But you're exactly right. I mean, homeschooling is probably the one category that represents a true break from the traditional public schools, and it's something that's been growing in popularity since the pandemic. More and more families are expressing an interest in doing that. So. New Mexico actually in this category did pretty well. We used rankings from our friends over at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, who rated the New Mexico homeschool regulatory environment as low regulation. The only thing that we would suggest improving there is not requiring notice. Right now in New Mexico, parents have to provide notice to the state on an annual basis that they want to homeschool. And if they're starting homeschooling for the first time, they have to notify the state 30 days prior to starting homeschooling. So obviously, we want to make sure families have flexibility on that approach, and those constant notification requirements kind of impede that. So that was the main thing. But overall, the homeschool environment in New Mexico is pretty good.
Yeah, so there are good things about the situation here in New Mexico, and I can say from personal experience that homeschooled my two of my daughters during the pandemic, and it was a relatively no muss, no fuss situation when it came to homeschooling. So definitely an option that is increasing in popularity, and something that folks should be encouraged to at least consider if they have the wherewithal to do that. Now, virtual schooling, that's kind of another one that's got a lot uh, of homeschool aspects. Obviously, the curriculum is driven by an organization that provides those virtual technologies and does the teaching, but parental involvement is critical, I think, in a virtual setting. I'm on the board of a virtual charter school here in New Mexico, uh, and it's kind of unique how we were able to get that done. But we're ranked a D, not nearly as good on virtual schooling as the A group, which includes Arkansas and Florida. But what's the benefit of virtual schooling? What are some of the criticisms of it, and what are states doing or not doing to use this technology?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've definitely seen states, looking to expand access to virtual schools. And it's always important when we start talking about virtual schools to distinguish between a quality virtual school and the kind of emergency crisis remote learning that public schools engaged in on Zoom during the pandemic. Those are two completely different, completely separate things. There's a lot of really good virtual schools out there where, this is all that they do. They've gotten this down to a science. They've got software in place that's easy to use, friendly for students, friendly for teachers. And of course, most importantly, not confusing for parents. I know that was a big criticism with Zoom learning. So, but when it comes to New Mexico, the state does allow for multi-district virtual schools, but there's no statewide virtual school. So there are some spots in the state, depending on where you are, where you might not have access to a virtual school option. So that was really the main thing that affected the score there. But virtual schools, are another great tool for some families. I mean, there are some kids who, for one reason or another, just being in a traditional classroom environment might not work for them. And going to a virtual school might put them in the best position to succeed. And we would say that it's up to the parents to recognize that, and states should trust parents to make that decision and make sure that those virtual schools are an option for those families to use.
Yeah, it's something that I think it has to be for the right kid. You either need pretty strong parental involvement and kind of managing that child, or the child needs to be a bit of a self-starter. And obviously, that can vary by age and student. So, uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
open enrollment is a form of choice, but it's like I said at the outset, it's kind of a picking between different government institutions. Do you see open enrollment? I mean, definitely some of the states that have open enrollment are among uh, the states that really have those conservative principles of choice and individual opportunity. Oklahoma, Arizona, Florida, Idaho, and Utah. It's like all of our neighbors really have, and then in Colorado's actually the top performing B state. Those were the A's in terms of open enrollment. It is open enrollment really that critical, or is it something that you're pick your poison kind of thing?
Yeah, I definitely think open enrollment is critical. And this is actually one of the areas that, I personally see lawmakers really trying to attack over the next couple of years, particularly in states, bordering states to New Mexico, states like Arizona, Utah, possibly Texas, depending on how this year goes. I mean, they've all got universal school choice programs. And so once you get something big like that done, I think we're seeing a lot of states start to shift their focus towards this open enrollment aspect. And, it's another tool in the tool belt, right? It's another choice for parents to make. The core concept of education freedom isn't favoring one type of school over another. It's making sure that all those different options, especially public schools, are available for families and that they have that choice to make. So yeah, I definitely think open enrollment is critical. It's really important that parents aren't just tied into one public school, that they can kind of take a look around them and choose to send their child to a public school outside their district, inside their district, whatever it might be.
Yeah, my in Albuquerque or New Mexico, we are 50th, or we're very much at the bottom on this. We're F, and I believe that was created because under the past governor Susana Martinez, she had in place a open enrollment policy. In fact, I looked just at your 2023 edition, and that is something that New Mexico dropped precipitously on. We were a C, ranked 15th back in 2023, but dropped to an F. And I think there were some challenges for the new governor to kill off open enrollment, the very progressive left wing Michelle Lujan Grisham. But in previous years there was a relatively open enrollment system in place thanks to the past governor. It just depended on whether states received A, B, C, or F rating in their kind of measuring tool for the schools, and that was enough to open up enrollment. But that program has since been eliminated thanks to the rise of a hostile governor.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely in New Mexico right now, it's not mandatory for school districts to participate in open enrollment. The only time school districts are required to participate is if the public school that the student attends was rated an F 2 out of the last 4 years. But outside of that, school districts don't have to accept these kids if they don't want to. And so that's a really big part of our scoring in the open enrollment category is we see this all over the country. It's not enough to just say that it's okay for school districts to participate in open enrollment. We have to tell them, you have to do this if you have the seat capacity. Otherwise, it's frankly just more work for them, and they're usually not interested in taking these kids. So
But I'm not playing devil's advocate here, but funding follows these kids. It's if you have open seats, I know that humans are inherently lazy, and government employees may be lazier than most, but your seats are open and you can bring money into your school district. Why wouldn't you want more kids to come
yeah,
to your school?
yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any answers for that? What do you find? Why do districts lobby or push back against those kinds of open enrollment concepts?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we see it quite a bit. I mean, it's especially true with students with special needs who might have an IEP, an individualized education plan. We see that all the time where school districts will say that we don't have the resources to take these kids. We don't have the seats, but in reality, we know that they do. Um, so there can be different reasons. It could be that, they could be looking at class sizes. They could be saying that they want even more resources in order to take these kids. And then there's the issue of transportation, and figuring out who pays for that. So it's much easier if the state just says, here's the system in place that we're going to use, here's who's going to pay for what. And you have to participate if you've got the flexibility. Like I said, unfortunately, we've seen in a number of states, where school districts just, refuse to participate for one reason or another. And yeah, it's really important to make sure that that's an option for families.
All right, now I realize I kind of probably caught you off guard and skipped over initially the education freedom programs because that is now such a big feature of this report.
Hmm.
But let's talk about the growth in those programs and why that is really the centerpiece here. What is it about those private educational choice programs that are that really you think make them such a critical feature of any educational policy environment in any state?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, these types of programs are the hallmark of a state with a really good education freedom environment. It all starts with dollars following those kids to whatever school is best for them. Point blank, it's recognizing that there's no such thing as a single school that is going to be able to best serve all students. Yet that's been the approach with public schools, right? We send kids to a public school based on nothing more than a zip code when, maybe that student would succeed in life if they were in a virtual school or a nearby private school. So, fundamentally, these education freedom programs, these funding programs, make sure that, especially for low income families, middle income families, they have the tools to access those other choices. So, that's really what this is about at its core, is making sure that parents are put in charge. And in order for us to put parents in charge and empower them with these choices, we've got to make sure that the state funding follows that student as well. And it's worth noting too that in all these states that we talk about, there's a dozen states now with universal school choice programs in place. And in every single one of those states, it's just the state money that follows the student. The local money, the local education money stays right there with the school, even though the student is leaving now. So, what we end up seeing is per pupil funding actually tends to go up. So, I mean, it's better for the families that think their public school is the best choice. They can continue to send their kids there. But for all those other families who, might have a better experience somewhere else, it's about making sure that there's nothing standing in their way and that they're able to access those other choices.
So as you note, we're talking about ESAs, vouchers, and tax credit scholarships. Those are the three primary choice programs we're talking about here. Vouchers and tax credit scholarships have been a while, around a fair amount of time, but ESAs have kind of taken hold and become the marquee program. Arizona being one of the earliest adopters. I forget if it was Arizona or Florida that really got the first universal ESA, but I assume from your perspective that ESAs are the best kind of approach to school choice, and kind of talk about how an ESA works, or works the same generally in all the states that have them, or maybe nuanced differences. But what is an ESA in reality?
Yeah, so an ESA stands for an education, we call them education scholarship account programs. And what it does is it takes the state portion of money that would have gone to teach a student in a public school and simply puts it into an account that parents can access and control. So they can choose to spend that money on tuition at a private school. They can spend it on therapies for a student with special needs. They can spend it on testing fees, school uniforms, textbooks. There's a whole variety of different, approved educational expenses that families can choose to spend that money on. So, like you mentioned, ESAs are definitely the most flexible of all the choices. In that they allow families to spend the money on a wider variety of expenses. But that shouldn't be taken as a knock on, tax credit scholarships or vouchers or even a newer model like we saw in Oklahoma with the refundable tax credit that they just implemented. Each state is different. There's 50 different laboratories of democracy, and an ESA might work best for one state, while a tax credit might work better for another. So the important thing is making sure that all kids are able to access those programs, and that's what we really focus in on in this report.
And I know Texas is one of the leading states likely to adopt this kind of model. Right now, New Mexico, normally we stick out like a sore thumb in terms of our economic freedom and economic indicators. Arizona, of course, very robust programs. They get an A in your index. Utah looks like a C. Colorado and Texas, though, two states with kind of differing political approaches on a wide variety of issues. But Texas would be a huge win for the school choice movement. How confident are you, based on your work with legislators down in Texas, that this is finally the year?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll just mention, Utah actually was ranked eighth in this year's report. They got an A minus.
Oh,
Um, and that's of
oh,
course because they have
yeah,
that universal program now, the Utah Fits All Scholarship. So um,
okay,
yeah,
yeah. I'm
but
looking at just in the report, it's a light shade of blue, which maybe I'm misreading it, but anyway, the
yeah, yeah,
on the freedom programs. So
yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, on Texas, we've definitely been looking at Texas for a number of years. Governor Abbott really has made this his biggest priority. He's been on record saying that he doesn't just want school choice in Texas necessarily. He wants universal. He wants every single kid to be able to use these programs. So lots going on in Texas. They just elected a new Speaker of the House. I know the Senate just released, I believe it's Senate Bill 2, which would create a universal ESA. So, things are moving, and we'll see where things end up. But definitely, you know, it's a big priority of the governors, and we'll see where it goes.
Any other states that you are looking at as likely to adopt some form of universal school choice or some aggressive move in the choice realm this year?
Yeah, definitely. Wyoming is a big one. Lawmakers have a universal bill that they're advancing there. I believe it just passed out of the committee of the whole today. So things are moving in Wyoming. North and South Dakota, we're expecting to see a push for a universal program there as well. New Hampshire with Governor Ayotte taking over there. She's made it clear that that's going to be a priority of hers, expanding their existing ESA program to include all kids. And South Carolina is another big one that we expect to see a big push there. So, potentially, 4 to 5 states that we could add this year to the dozen that already have universal programs. So, yeah, we're excited, and 2025 is looking to be another big year for families.
Yeah, Texas would be huge, obviously, because of the size of that population
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
being kind of known as you have the two big red states, Texas and Florida. Of course, Florida is a recognized leader on these choice issues. California, New York being on the polar opposite end.
that left the Democrat Party and joined the Republican Party. We just saw in California a state senator left the Democrat Party and joined the Republicans, and then in Louisiana they just passed a universal ESA program last year, and I believe it was about a dozen House Democrats voted in favor of the bill. So this is not it's not a partisan issue. Americans have made it clear that this is something that they think needs to happen, and yeah, I think you're starting to see those walls break down. You're starting to see Democrats peel off and support this, which is great to see. So hopefully, in some of those blue states, we'll start to see some more choice for families too.
Well, coming from a blue state that has not obviously done much, certainly not on the private school choice uh, that area. Um, I think that from a voter perspective, you're right. It's absolutely true that uh, yeah, a lot more depends on whether you have children or you have an experience with the education system where it wasn't getting the job done. Uh, but the politicians, very rarely do you see Democrat politicians willing to stand up to the unions and say, no, we need this. We need a choice, and this priority really has to be something that we push. It seems like there's a group think mentality when you get on the left side of the political spectrum that they just don't want to bring up school choice, don't want to bring up education changes. They just want to keep spending more money. At least that's the way things work here in New Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, even the polling, our friends at EdChoice do some really good polling. And in New Mexico, 70% of adults say that they support ESAs. And then if you look at that number among school parents, it goes up to 77% support. So, I mean, that should be a very clear message to the legislature and the governor that, this is what voters want. And even in blue and purple states, this is something that everybody can get behind. So,
Yeah, well, I would be remiss if I didn't note that this happens to be school choice week when we are having this conversation. I don't know if you or Alec are participants, but thank you for sitting down with me and presenting this information and sharing the highlights and lowlights of New Mexico's performance. Are you doing anything personally or organizationally for School Choice Week? Is this a busy week for you?
Yeah, no, we're this is always a busy time of year for for everybody in the movement. I mean, it's phenomenal to see all the pictures and images, of all these kids and families going to their state capitals with the yellow banners that say National School Choice Week. It's just such a great reminder of the support that education freedom has, and it's such a great reminder for policymakers that like I mentioned before, there's no such thing as one size fits all when it comes to education. Lots of families will choose their local public school, which is great. But it's important that we have those other options there. And what better way to make that case than to talk to those kids themselves and talk to those parents themselves and hear their stories. It's just so effective and it's so great. And I'm so glad that we're able to do this every year.
Yeah, and if folks want to find out more about School Choice Week and what's going on in New Mexico, they can go to schoolchoiceweek.com. If they want to find out, or if you want to find out this report, we'll of course have links posted at errorsofenchantment.com, but you can go to alec.org to find out more about Andrew and his work and the organization ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which of course published this and does great work on a wide variety of issues, including taxes and economic freedom, educational freedom, et cetera. But Andrew, before we conclude, anything that we missed in our conversation you want to make sure to get out, or additional information that people might be able to access from ALEC or other websites that you might send people to?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. I mean, you mentioned our website, alec.org, alec.org. We've got tons of resources. Our this particular index is going to be an annual publication. We're looking to publish that every January. So definitely be on the lookout for that next year. But outside of that, we've got a lot of model policies and articles and blog posts and lots of good resources, both for policymakers and parents as well. As you mentioned, whether it's education policy or tax policy or whatever it might be, Alex got tons of great resources there. So definitely would encourage folks to check that website out.
Just to be clear, I didn't miss one from last year. Was there a 2024?
No, you're correct. Yeah, we
Okay.
shifted the release schedule from later in the year, so this gets us on a January cadence. So it'll be annual moving forward.
Yeah, no, these reports are a lot of work to put together. So congratulations on doubling your workload, or my condolences. I don't know which, but yeah, we'll continue to look forward to these now annual reports. And especially in recent years, the movements and momentum on school choice and some of these education policies has really gotten quite quite great, momentous. There's been a lot of changes, so it probably helps to have this annual report to see where states are moving when it comes to some of these education issues. And of
Yeah,
course, outcomes are critical as well, and we want to make sure that choice and improved educational outcomes, especially in a state like New Mexico, where we're dead last in education in the NAEP index. We need to do everything we can in this state to improve educational outcomes. But uh, I am sure that we will see those results as we have in states like Florida that have improved educational access over the years. It doesn't happen overnight.
exactly right. Exactly right. Now, I'd point out too, North Carolina is a perfect example. They moved up 23 spots after getting a universal program last year. So that's all it would take in New Mexico.
Exactly. Well, happy National School Choice Week, everybody, and go check out Alec and Andrew's report here on educational freedom. And thanks for coming on today, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.